do with that particular way of framing what traditionally we might call the intersection between faith and economic justice, is that we're trying to get the focus back on the old cosmology of the economics of grace that we find in the Hebrew Scriptures. Sabbath was a tradition that was fundamentally a social and economic ethos when it's introduced, particularly in the book of Exodus. And we're trying to help remind both campaigners and also churches that the fundamental premises of the economic cosmology of the Bible have to do with the assertion that the earth is the Lord's and therefore is a gift that is available to everyone, not to be hoarded by a few. This is the lesson of the manna in the wilderness in Exodus 16. That sin is fundamentally defined in the Hebrew Scriptures as inequality or oppression. And that therefore, if we want to be about the work of healing and redemption in the world, we have to recover this deeper sense of the narrative, the ongoing narrative of economic justice in the Bible. So for shorthand, we describe Sabbath economics as an economic way of reading the Bible in order to read the economy biblically. And that's what the Sabbath Economics Collaborative is all about. We've established a website by that name. And it's a collection of theologians, economists, and popular educators who are trying to amplify a perspective on economic justice, on the ethics of the global economy, and on the role of faith and churches in all of that. Well, we think this is a way of life, this question of economic justice. We recently produced what we call a sevenfold household Sabbath economics covenant, in which we invite and challenge households of faith to look at 7 aspects of daily life, namely how we use our surplus capital, how we deal with debt, how we deal with giving, how we look at our ecological footprint, how we look at our consumption patterns, how we deal with our solidarity with the poor or lack of contact with the poor, and finally how we look at work patterns and rest patterns, the Sabbath proper. We've developed this covenant because we think that many, particularly middle-class Christians, if issues of social justice or economic justice are on their mind at all, it usually seems very, very remote. And it's our conviction that this has to do with fair trade products. This has to do with predatory debt, predatory lending processes, particularly in the U.S., where that's a big social justice issue. It has to do with affordable housing. It has to do with the living wage. All of these ways that it practically intersects with our lived life. In other words, with the price of eggs and milk, with what we do with our labor, with how we handle our savings. We think these are very practical matters, and we really urge Christian households to start looking at these things and taking small steps to become more congruent between our faith and values on one hand and our practices on the other. One of the areas that I think is most hopeful in our churches, at least in the U.S., and I think this would be true in the U.K. as well, is there is an openness to new perspectives and new consciousness around environmental issues. Probably of all the social justice issues, environmentalism has made the most impact over the last 20 years in our churches. There's been a percolation. People are starting to ask questions about stewardship theology for the earth and about global warming and about how we green our churches in practical ways. There's been a number of workshops here at Greenbelt I've noticed on the topic. So I see that as one of the hopeful signs. On the other hand, some of our theology has been a bit fuzzy on the matter, in my opinion. We tend to go running towards some of these so-called new cosmologies. And I'm not unhappy with the new cosmologies, except that I think many people see that as that we need to depart from the old cosmologies of the Bible. Now, we think the old cosmologies of the Bible are not environmentally friendly because, frankly, they've been taught that way by the churches for millennia, or at least for the past 500 years. My conviction as a biblical scholar is that actually the Bible is so much closer to what we today would call earth spirituality than we are. The problem is not with the Bible. The problem is with our modern urban consciousness, which is so profoundly alienated from the earth and so socialized by ideas of the Enlightenment that the earth exists only to be exploited for our benefit. These are not biblical concepts, they're Enlightenment concepts. They're the product not of the scriptures but of capitalist modernity. But a lot of Christians don't understand that, so I'm on a little bit of a mission to, on one hand, try to point out how it really is the plague of modern technocratic capitalism that has convinced us that forests are only valuable for their bored feet, or rivers are only valuable for the gigawatts they can generate, or hillsides are only valuable for the condominiums we can build on them, as very modernist ideas. And to try to recover, on the other hand, the notion that our scriptures actually were produced by people who were much closer to the earth and to the spirituality of the land than we will ever be. And therefore, we do not need to embrace a new cosmology so much as the old biblical cosmology, which, as it turns out, once you start reading it from a green perspective, has everything to do with earth spirituality, beginning with the very first altar in the Bible in Genesis 12, which was built by Abraham under an oak tree, who Abraham encounters God under an oak tree, to Jacob, who lies his head on a dreaming stone in the desert in Genesis 28, and there discovers the true house of God. The infamous 11th commandment in Exodus 20, which says, "Do not build an altar with stone that has been chiseled, because it's only an unhewn stone altar that is pleasing to the Lord." These are all traditions, old traditions that we've sort of ignored in our churches. And so I'm going to try to be pointing out how many of these biblical traditions have a lot to say to the conversation about what a true earth spirituality would mean today.